Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today in this video, we are starting a new series on Azure networking based services. We'll cover different topics on Azure networking services. To start with it, we are going to discuss today application gateway as a network service. We'll learn about the different feature concept of the application gateway configuration. It's going to be the multiple video series on this particular topic. In this specific video, we will cover about application gateway configuration, what it is, what all features offering it provides so that you can choose the right level of service for your application architecture. And then later on, we will have a demonstration to configure the various feature it provides. I hope you find it useful. If it is, please watch all the videos available on this particular series. Let's first of all understand what is application gateway. So the application gateway is a layer 7 load balancing technique which offers end-to-end load balancing right from the user sends request from their browser to the request goes into the backend server. So the traditional load balancing service usually works on the OSI model 4, which offers the load balancing at the protocol like TCP and UDP, whereas application gateway service works on the layer 7, which can route the traffic based on the protocol like HTTP or HTTPS. User tries to send a request to the contoso.com/images. Based on the configuration with the application gateway, it detects the URL, checks the configuration. In this case, it will check the configuration in the URL with the /image type, and once it finds that appropriate rule, it will send the request back to the backend pool of the image pool. Similarly, if you have a request type which is of the video pool /video, then it will send request to the backend of the video pool. So that's how, based on your protocol type or URL type, you can make a decision, or your application gateway service can make a decision and then send a request back to the appropriate backend server. Not only that, it also provides various other capabilities and features which we'll discuss later in this video, such as one of the important feature, as you can see here in the picture, is about the WAF configuration, which is a web application firewall configuration. So any request which is coming to the application gateway, you can configure the OS rule WAF configuration to evaluate your incoming request, so that if application gateway finds any issues with your request URL, headers, or even with the body, such as the SQL injections, cross-site scripting, or any kind of vulnerability, if it finds, basically it can block the request and then not to forward to the backend side. And then later on, you can evaluate those blocked requests and then perform your own action just to protect your backend server from any kind of attack. So as I mentioned, application gateway not only provides the layer 7 load balancing support, but it also provides variety of other benefits to protect your backend. Let's look at some of those benefits which we can use with application gateway. So these are some key benefits which you can use with the help of Azure application gateway in your application. You can use the SSL offloading. It means it can offload the SSL certificate for any incoming request, and then it can send the request without the SSL encryption to the backend server. By having the SSL offloading in place, it can make the interaction with your backend server much more faster and efficient. That will give you more performance gain with your backend services. You can enable the WAF setting with the application gateway so that any incoming request, it will evaluate those requests and then it can either block it or it can log the request depending upon the configuration you choose. Application gateway also offers the settings or the configurations like URL routing. So as we have seen that based on the URL routing rule you configure, you can send requests to the appropriate backend pool, such as if you are configure a rule to send the image server with the URL /images to the backend pool of image server. You can send it like that. If you have you also have a support to host the multi-site hosting. It means a same application gateway can be configured to route traffic to multiple web application. We'll have a demonstration and look at how do we route traffic to the multiple web applications. You can also redirect the application gateway traffic to any third-party URL, such as I can route the traffic to a google.com depending upon the port or the listener configuration which you configured in your application gateway. You have a feature available such as the session affinity that gives you the ability to serve a request from the same backend server which user is already connected, so that user gets better performance for the subsequent request. Next, you have the configuration for connection draining. What do we mean by the connection draining? Is, let's say application gateway has the ability to check the backend pools, and if any of the backend pool unavailable or unhealthy, then application gateway intelligent enough to stop routing the traffic to the unhealthy nodes, and then it will notify you with the health status that this particular server is not available, so that you can take a look at it. Next, you have the ability to rewrite host header URL. So if you have a requirement to modify your incoming request URL header or even though the request body, then with the help of rewrite settings available with the application gateway, you can modify the incoming request data or the information and then send it to the backend server. That's again another feature. Apart from these, there are some other features available such as scalability, auto scaling, such as the support to HTTP2 protocol, which you can use with the application gateway. Now, have a look at how do we create the application gateway in Azure. So before we start creating the application gateway, just one thing to clear here is Azure Application Gateway is not the only service offering available for the load balancing scenario. Azure has a full set of rich services available which can offer you the load balancing features. And if you want, you can leverage any of those. The services like Azure Load Balancer, Application Gateway, Traffic Manager, or Azure Front Door. And now, if you are not sure which one to use, Azure Portal offers you a guideline to make a decision which one is the best fit option for your project architecture. If you want to use that guideline, you can simply search load balancing and choose this particular selection. And once you open this, it will give you the dashboard with set of questionnaires here at the center. If you look at the left side, here is the overview which has the questionnaires, and then you have the list of services available which has the load balancing feature or capability. Now, if you answer this questionnaire, possibly you would be able to make a decision which is the right set of feature or service useful for my use. For example, if I choose this particular service option, then it will give me, okay, this is the best services you can use, or the combination of these services which you can use if you prefer more security, for example. Okay, that's what's about the services. And if you want, you can have a service comparison as well. If you would like to have a comparison between these different services, what all different offerings these services offers. So this is just a quick overview or comparison which you can go and check for between these between these four services basically. Okay, and again you have the startup guide as well. Now coming back to the application gateway, how do we provision? So you can see that I already have an application gateway which is provisioned here, and if you want to create more, you can click here, right? And then you would be able to provision a next one. You need to provide a resource group. I do have the networking resource group. I'll choose that. Need to provide the application gateway name. So I'll say gateway 02, and then location. Here is the application gateway tier. So with the application gateway, which they have started with the standard and then move to the WAF, from standard to WAF, and then they have enabled some additional feature on top of the standard and WAF, which they are calling it as standard 2, standard v2, and the WAF v2. So let's have a quick comparison between the standard tier and the WAF tier. So if you look at here on the tier side, if I select standard, I do not get the auto scaling enabled and this configuration, which you need to specify minimum maximum auto scaling count. So you can clearly see the difference here. WAF is standard and standard v2. The difference is standard v2 offers this auto scaling feature. Application gateway v2 also offers the feature like availability zone. What does it means? That the application gateway service itself is a regional service which will work on a particular region. For example, it can target to a region. If entire region goes down, your application gateway or your project or the services which are dependent on application gateway, those are gone basically. But now if a particular zone is gone, so you do have option to replicate your application gateway into different zones depending upon the availability zone configuration. So at least within the zone, if there is a harm, then you do have option to recover your application gateway service. So that's what this availability zone feature talked about. Now if I change my selection to the WAF and then see the difference between standard and WAF, and then we'll go to the next one. So if you look at the difference between standard and WAF, the difference is you need to, in the with WAF, you need to provide the SKU size, which can go up to medium and large. You have the option to change the SKU size in the WAF, and then obviously you have the option to enable the firewall. You can enable it or disable it depending upon your configuration. Again, if you enable the firewall, which firewall mode you want to choose? Is it a detection or prevention? As I mentioned earlier, if you choose a prevention, then any vulnerabilities found to the incoming request, it is going to be blocked. If it is detection, it will log those vulnerabilities and still send the request to the backend server. You can set up the HTTP protocol, HTTP2 protocol as well. So if you have a requirement to set up a bidirectional session or duplex session within your application, then you can set up a HTTP2 protocol. One thing to clear here about the HTTP2 protocol is it set up the HTTP protocol between the user and the application gateway. It will not set up the HTTP2 protocol between the application gateway to the backend. So from application gateway to backend, it will still be basically HTTP1 only. Okay. Next, you need to provide the virtual network. While setting up the virtual network or specifying the virtual network for your application gateway, you need to remember that you need to have a dedicated subnet configured for the application gateway, and you need to remember that you have enough set of IP address range available within the application gateway in case if you are configuring the auto scaling. For example, if I select WAF v2, then yes, I do have option to auto scale setup. And if I set up auto scaling, if application gateway is performing worse, it will obviously auto scale the application gateway. It means that it will create more number of horizontal replica for my application gateway. So let's say one application gateway is using one private IP address. If I auto scale my application gateway to 10 instances of application gateway, then I would require 9 additional IP addresses within my subnet. Okay, so if that's a requirement, even if that is going to be that is what it is expected in your project, then make sure that you have the enough set of IP address allocated within your application gateway subnet. Otherwise, what will happen due to the lack of availability of the subnet, even though your application gateway service is not performing well, it won't be able to auto scale it. Okay, so you have to remember that before you make that particular selection. Next, you have to provide the front end. So the way you can configure the application gateway front end, either you can choose public IP address if you are exposing your application gateways and publicly available service over the internet. That's what it is recommended. If you are using application gateway as the internal load balancer, not publicly exposed, then you can use private, or in case if you want both, then you can use both of these options. So if you use this publicly available option, which we are going to use in our case, you need to specify a public IP address which is not being used anywhere, or you can create a new public IP address. And you can see that the requirement for the public IP address is it has to be a standard SKU and the assignment has to be static. Okay, once you select OK, you can go to the next option. So we have set up the front end. Now let's set up a backend pool. So backend pool with application gateway, you can have a one or more backend pool which your incoming traffic can target to, depending upon the configuration, but you need to have at least one. So let's create a backend pool. So for now, you can create a backend pool without adding any backend. So for example, at the moment we are creating application gateway, we don't have any backend configured. So at this point of time, I can directly say, okay, I'll create a backend pool without any configuration, and then I'll click on add. But if you have a backend pool, so these are the target type which you can specify. You have the IP address or FKD name which you can specify as a target, like IP address, public or private IP addresses, or the domain name which you can specify here as a backend pool. You can specify the virtual machine which you have created in the same region. You can specify the virtual machine skill set, or the app service which is your web app or web API name which you can specify here. So this is the backend pool type you can use as a backend service instance. So now we have a front end, we have a backend, and next you need to configure the routing rule. Okay, because when a traffic comes to the application gateway, it will interact with the front end, and then our target is that it should go to backend pool or to any of the backend which we have configured. And how it will go to the backend is depending upon the rule which we will configure. For that, we need to create a rule. So you need to have at least one rule to create application gateway. Let's call it a default rule. And the way rule works is it basically requires two configuration. One, you need to have a listener. So listener are the set of configuration on which your incoming request traffic is going to be listened by the application gateway. So if you have a listener 1, let's say, and then we are saying that this listener will listen to front-end IP which is of type public. If you have a public and private both created, then you would get an option which you want to target this listener on which front-end, public or private. But at this time we have just used the public as a front end, so we are getting the only that option. Then you have the option to select the protocol and the port. So which means that this listener will listen a traffic to any traffic which is coming on the HTTP protocol with port 80. Then it will target the traffic to the backend target. So next you need to specify the backend target, which is a backend pool. For this listener, this is going to be my backend pool. If you have multiple backend pool, you can specify for port 80 HTTP traffic, I can go to this particular backend pool. For port 443, I want to go to some other backend pool, for example. If you don't have any backend, you can create it from here as well if you want to create a new one. If you want to, next you need to, once your listener has accepted a traffic and it has detected a right backend, now how does it interacts or sends the incoming request to the backend is it uses the HTTP setting. So at the moment, if you see that on this drop down, we do not have any HTTP setting configured. So now you require to set up at least one HTTP settings configured. So HTTP setting is the connection mechanism which application gateway will use to interact with your backend while sending this particular request. So basically we are saying how this particular request will communicate to the backend service. And let's say we are saying HS for HTTP settings. I will give you an appropriate name later on. So we are saying that backend pool, which this request is going to connect, they are still going to connect over HTTP. But if your backend says no, I will only allow communication over the HTTP, then you need to choose this. But for now, let's consider my backend is still on HTTP, so I'm basically using traffic from HTTP to HTTP only. Do I want the cookie based affinity to be used? If you want to use either of these, you can specify the setting. If there are some options by default available, but we'll discuss all these options later in our other demonstration. For example, if you want to override any host name, you want to use the custom prop or any other host name type, you can use it. I'll click on the add here. I'll click add again because that add was for adding the HTTP setting. As you can see, you can specify the path based routing as well, which we'll discuss later on. For now, just click on add. So both front end, rule and back end, all of them are configured. Let's go to the next section, which is tag. I'll leave it as is, and then that's it. You can review the changes. Click here on the create button and that will create the application gateway. It will take a couple of minutes, like 5 minutes or so, and then once it is ready, you can basically go to the section here and see the application gateway. As of now, we have this application gateway created. Once any application gateway will be created, you can view this particular setting. For example, in my case, I have the standard V2, which still offers the auto scaling and managed scaling, both the option, which I can configure. For web application firewall, the option is given but I can't enable it because I'm using standard V2. But if I want to use the WAF feature, I need to move to the next tier, which is WAF V2. Okay. Next, you have the backend pool, which we have configured. At the moment, you can see that my backend pool is targeting to one target and one rule. And then you have the HTTP setting, listener, rule, and help prop. That's all in this particular. So far, we have learned what is application gateway, what are the different configuration features available with application gateway, comparison of all these features between the different pricing tiers, what are the different components of the application gateway, how do you configure the application gateway from Azure portal. If you have found this video useful, please give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. See you in the next video. Thanks for watching it.